I'm thrilled to be here at the Breakers, and I'm thrilled to be part of the health system. I joined in late April, and we're actually the first Department of Population Health in the country that we're aware of at a medical school. There are a few at veterinary schools, and I can't figure that one out yet, although some people feel that their pets are people too. But the Department of Population Health is trying to improve the health of the population at large, and what we're going to be talking about today is wellness and looking good from inside out. So we're going to go through some ways to look and feel your best at any age. So, you know, we used to, as Dr. Muir said this earlier this morning, we used to think that 50 was middle age, and now we know that 50 is the new 30. 70 is the new 40. Whatever, we can look as good as we feel, and if we stay active, we have the opportunity to be like that participant who's now in the front row, who would be looking wonderful. And actually, when you hear part of my talk later, she's doing exactly one of the things that I'm going to ask all of you to do. One thing I do ask, if any of you do decide to ride a Harley, please wear a helmet, because from a public health standpoint, that's critical. So here's one of the first participation phases. And this is a little more telling now, because I think she may be a little busy. But if you could take out your clickers, and if you could tell me, why does Hillary look like this? Is it because she didn't have enough makeup on? She didn't have enough sleep? Bill is at it again. She had one too many the night before. Or is it all of the above? So if we could cue the music, please. Oh my goodness gracious. Well, it's actually that she didn't get enough sleep, and probably with the world events right now, our Secretary of State is a bit overwhelmed. But sleep can affect our appearance, and we really, when we're thinking about being healthy and being well, one of the things that we often neglect the most is enough sleep. And there are some myths that we don't need as much sleep as we age. We actually do continue to need a good night's rest every night. And when people are sleep deprived, we always know that we may not look or feel as healthy, we may not look or feel as attractive, and we certainly feel more tired. So just to talk briefly about our sleep cycle, and it used to be that we had 4 stages, and now it's 3 stages, and the REM sleep, or the rapid eye movement sleep. So as we're lying in bed, we're drifting off, you're easily awakened. You know, a noise, something may wake you up. As you go into light sleep, your heart rate and your temperature begin to go down. Stage 3, you're going into deep sleep, and you're disoriented when you're woken up. When you're in REM sleep, your muscles are all limp. You're dreaming. Part of that is so that you don't hurt yourself while you're dreaming. So you're actually not running if you're running in your dream or doing some kind of movement. But it's important to have all these stages, because stages 1, 2, and 3 allow our bodies the time to repair our tissues.
Now, Jackie,
build bone. Yes.
Sana, just to interrupt there. So going back to your previous slide, does this happen once during the night? How often does this happen?
Well, it actually is cyclical. Okay. It occurs, our REM sleep cycle, our sleep cycles are about 1.5 hours to 2 hours long. Now, some of you may be aware of this most acutely if you've ever had surgery and you know you're waking up every 1.5 hours, because that's when the pain may come back, or you're feeling some discomfort. You're like, why am I waking? By clockwork, you can wake up every hour and a half or so, because as you go through the cycle, you reach the point where you're more easily woken up. You also may know that sometimes, if you still are woken up by an alarm, that sometimes you may wake up before the alarm, which is a good sign that you're often getting enough sleep. But sometimes you say, my goodness, why is it that today, when I woke up, it was so easy for me to get up, but it was so difficult for me to get up the next day? And that may be where you are in your sleep cycle. If you were in the midst of stage 3, if you were disoriented, then it would be more difficult. If you were at stage 1 or about to be woken up, if you just finished your REM sleep, then it's much easier for you to wake up. So the first 3 stages help repair tissue, build bone and muscle, and strengthen the immune system, and they also help reduce inflammation. REM sleep is where you create memory, it spawns creativity, and they've actually done some studies where they've deprived folks of REM sleep, and they've noticed some tremendous issues with overall health. We know that if people don't have any REM sleep, it can have very fatal consequences. We also know that if people are prevented from having enough REM sleep, and this has been done in studies, that it can lead to weight gain. So it's important to dream, both sleeping and awake. Part of it's stress reduction, part of it's just getting enough sleep. But it's important for overall health in many, many ways. So how can you
Can I ask another question along those lines,
Sure.
Jackie? So if you sleep an hour and a half and you wake up, let's say because your bladder wakes you up, your bladder's full, and there's some patients who have to get up every hour and a half. Does it, if you wake up, do something, go back to sleep for an hour and a half, is that equal to just going straight through?
Well, ideally you'd have uninterrupted sleep, but if you wake up at the appropriate time in your sleep cycles, when you're waking up at that hour and a half, you may feel almost as refreshed as if you had gotten a full night's sleep. Part of it is you can get a little bit more used to it. Ideally, you will feel more refreshed if you can sleep through many of the cycles without waking up. But if you're waking up when it's at that easily arousable period, and as you're going into stage 1, then it's going to be much better than being woken up in a later stage.
Jackie, if you're taking naps during the day, are they good or bad? Does it matter if I take it for 15 minutes or an hour?
Well, power naps are advocated actually and have been shown to have universal benefit for folks, and actually in some countries it's basically the culture for folks to take a short siesta in the afternoon. And there's growing evidence that a mid-afternoon short sleep, less than 40 minutes, can be very beneficial in terms of overall aptitude, productivity, and overall well-being, particularly if folks aren't able to get enough sleep at night. But if folks are sleeping too much during the day, then they often have difficulty sleeping at night. So it's a balance. So a little cat nap or a power nap can be very beneficial. We just don't want to extend those naps too long. But we want to think about our sleep in terms of sleep hygiene, a sleep diet, so to speak. You want to make sure you don't have any caffeinated beverages after 2 p.m., so let's use the decaf in the back. You want to think about the consequences of having a drink. People think, oh, I'll have a drink, it'll put me to sleep. It may put you to sleep, but it is going to interrupt your sleep cycles, so you won't have a good night's sleep. So if you're having more than that 1 drink that's recommended if you're a woman, or 2 if you're a man, as long as you're not driving, then it may impact your sleep, and you may find that overall you do much better if you're not drinking, if you're having sleep problems. Don't take your worries to bed is always very easy for us to say, but ruminating about what you should have, could have done as you're trying to go to bed is not going to help you go to sleep. You do want to fix a bedtime and wakening time. You know, many people who work or morning people, they find that even when they don't have to get up, they do get up early in the morning, and that's just the way their bodies are built. And there's actually something called a clock gene, which we're all genetically programmed, whether we're a morning person or a night owl. So sometimes you can get up early and train yourself, but you will also find that there's always some. How many of you are morning people? How many of you are, and how, that was, I should have done a clicker on this. How many of you are night owls? And you know, even when you're not working, you notice you can change these things. So it's often important, you know, for me, I knew I was never going to be a surgeon because I would have to get up at 5:30 in the morning and be functional. So I knew, because I'm a night owl, that an early morning profession may not be the best choice for me or my patients. You want to exercise, but you don't want to do it right before bed. You also want to think about what you're watching on TV right before bed. You don't want to watch something that's disturbing. You may want to have a late night snack, something that's high in tryptophan, something like bananas, warm milk, something like that that can be soothing, that can aid in your sleeping.
So before you leave sleep, so what about medications to help you sleep?
Well, you know, medications can help you sleep. They shouldn't be used on a daily basis.
Because?
Because our bodies become habituated. You can actually have difficulty sleeping without them. And ideally, they can be used for short-term issues. It may be that you have something going on and you're really having a lot of difficulty sleeping, but they don't allow you to go into the deep REM sleep that you really need. So they can be used as short-term aids. Again, there may be situations where it's advised for you to take this by your physician, so you should have this discussion with your doctor. But in general, it's not advisable to use a sleep aid every night. Okay, so now let's...
There's a question, I believe.
Okay.
Let's get a microphone.
Okay. No matter what time I go to sleep, and I normally don't have a problem falling asleep, I wake up 4 hours later, maximum 5, and I can never get back to sleep again. So if I go to bed at 10, I could wake up at 2 or 3. If I go to bed at 12, I'll wake up at 4 or 5. Now what? I mean, and this has been going on for a long time.
You know, when there are changes in your sleep habits, one thing to think about is, have there been changes? Are you on a medication that may be counteracting this? Is it that maybe you need to think about a little more physical activity and changes like that? There are some folks who find they need less sleep at night, so it may be that you want to sleep a little later, or if you get up after 4 or 5 hours and you find that you just can't go back to sleep, get up. Don't lie around in the bed and ruminate over the fact that you can't get back to sleep, because that's not going to help things. Get up, do something, read a book, and maybe you'll find that you're able to drift off again after you've tried to do something else, and maybe in 20 or 30 minutes you're able to do it.
Along those lines, do you need less sleep as you get older, and how much sleep do you need?
You know, we used to think more that people needed a little less sleep when they got older, but now it's sort of equivocal whether in fact you do need less sleep. It used to be that, you know, when you're a baby you need 14, 16 hours or more, and then it sort of went down to about 6 hours as you got older. But now there's some evidence that shows that in fact as you get older you still could benefit from the 7 to 8 hours that ideally most people get every night. I say ideally because most people in the United States tend to be a little bit sleep deprived.
Excuse me, I have a question. If you are in REM sleep, very deep, but the dreams that you are having are closer to nightmares than sweet dreams, what kind of rest do you actually get from that REM sleep?
That's a great question. And you know, the dreaming mechanism, I don't think we fully understand as we're trying to process the events and what's precipitating the bad dreams. You know, there are certainly in childhood there are phases where young children, they go through certain phases where they have more night frights, and then it goes into nightmares, and then that seems to pass. You still are getting sleep even if, and you are still getting REM sleep, so you still are getting the benefits even if the dreams are disturbing. Okay, so.
Another question to the side there?
Okay.
You're not putting people to sleep, Jackie, so that's a good sign.
Okay, you know. I'm exercising here, standing, you know.
Yeah. I'm a night owl.
Okay.
And I have a problem because I'm up at 7 o'clock in the morning in order to swim. I can't get a lane at the pool unless I'm up early. And and I have no other time to swim. Is it a trade-off for me to swim anyway? I swim a mile in the morning and take that disadvantage of having a bad night's sleep.
Well, the question is, how much of a night owl are you really? Are you going to bed at midnight?
12 o'clock.
Okay, so you're getting, what, about 6.5 hours of sleep? You know, I may advocate you're getting
probably 6.
Okay. I may advocate you taking a nap in early afternoon to make up for that sleep deficit, or it may be that you go to sleep a little later, or you may want to find a new pool that's open for those hours that you like.
No, that's impossible.
All right, that one I can't help you with.
At the Breakers Hotel you could do it, but not at mine.
Okay. So let's go back to our clickers, and we have a question about sunlight. So, sunlight helps prevent cancer, osteoporosis, heart disease, all of the above, or none of the above. We can. Okay, well, you know, it's actually all of the above. There are going to be some caveats, and we'll go through some of those caveats, because not all, it can also cause cancers, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. But vitamin D is critical for, and as we're learning more and more about the benefits of vitamin D, we know that sunlight causes our skin to develop vitamin D or to activate it, and it's a whole pathway through the liver, and then through dietary intake we absorb some vitamin D from what we eat, and then there's metabolism through our body, and in the kidneys it gets converted to the active form of vitamin D. We do know that the two cofactors go together, and it's important to have both, but again, moderation is the key. But as we're learning more and more about vitamin D, I think we're going to learn more about the benefits of vitamin D, and it may be why some diseases are more common in the northern hemisphere compared to the southern hemisphere in terms of sunlight exposure, in terms of autoimmune diseases and other things that may be related to vitamin D deficiency. And again, this has really been burgeoning in the past few years with associations between low levels of vitamin D and increased rates of heart disease and certain cancers. Certainly osteoporosis is associated with low vitamin D intake.
One question? Mm-hmm. Yeah, is this with or without sunscreen, by the way? What does sunscreen do?
Well, sunscreen will block the vitamin D from getting in, but you don't need a lot of sun to actually get the vitamin D. You need about 15 minutes, and it doesn't have to be your whole body. It can be just a small patch of your arm or your hand that will have exposure. So we're going to talk about a little more about sunlight, so maybe in the better hours to come in, like when this gentleman is swimming. If he's swimming outside at 7 a.m., maybe a better time to get some of that sunlight. But sunscreen can block some of the vitamin D from getting absorbed through the skin. So vitamin D deficiency we talked about can lead to osteoporosis, certain cancers, heart disease, autoimmune disease, diabetes, and obesity are associated with low levels of vitamin D. And again, a lot of these connections are fairly newly discovered, and we're learning more and more every day.
These are causations or correlations on that?
Well, they're associations. So, you know, we can't say that vitamin D deficiency certainly is associated with osteoporosis. There are studies that show when you look doing a certain type of study called a case control study, which compares folks with and without a particular condition, that those with the condition had much, much lower rates of vitamin D than those with it. So again, I think in order to answer your causation question, you need to give us a few more years. But right now they're finding these associations.
If you take vitamin D supplements, how much is it safe to take, and does it affect your liver?
That's a great question, and again, I think most people would recommend that you take somewhere between 400 and 2,000, but as Dr. Rosen said earlier, this is also something you want to make sure your physician is aware of. And I don't think, and what you can do is you can actually have your vitamin D levels measured. There are normal ranges where your vitamin D level should be, so if you are taking a supplement, you can get your level measured to make sure you're in the normal range so you don't take too much. Because you can accumulate this in your liver. It's a fat-soluble vitamin, so you don't want to take too much. There are some people who take 5,000 units a day, and they may take it for immune purposes or for other reasons. That may be too much for most people. And right now, most people would advocate on the lower end of the spectrum, again, until we learn more. But this is one time where you can measure the amount and make sure you're in the normal range. Now, sunlight isn't always bad. And light from, this often may not occur too much when you're coming down to Palm Beach, because you do have a lot of sunlight, but there can be seasonal affective disorder, which is cyclical, late fall, improves on sunny days, and is really related to light-dark cycles. And it can be depression that, all the signs and symptoms of depression, hopelessness, anxiety, loss of energy, social withdrawal, overeating, and oversleeping may occur. Again, there are light boxes that some folks who don't have enough natural sunlight or natural light exposure can use that are very beneficial, but not all sun is always too bad. However, too much sun can be an issue. If we have too much sun, it damages our skin's elasticity, the blood vessels in our face, and it can lead to precancerous and cancerous lesions. It can also lead to cataracts and problems with the immune system, because as you know, the skin is an active organ in our body. And there are immune processes that go on in the skin, so we don't want too much sunlight. What happens is with the sun and skin is the ultraviolet lights from the sun act on the melanocytes, or the pigment-carrying cells in our skin, that produce melanin that protect the skin from the ultraviolet rays. If the UV rays exceed what can be blocked by your level of melanin, sunburn will result. Too much sun can cause breakages in DNA. When DNA breaks, the cell reorganizes and it can form a cancer. Sunlight is definitely it's causative in skin cancers such as melanoma, basal cell, and squamous cell carcinoma. Basal cell and squamous cell carcinoma are the most common cancers in this country. They're actually so common that they're not even reported in state cancer registries. Melanoma, which can be life-threatening, is actually a reportable cancer, and thankfully is much less common in terms of skin cancers.
So basal cell, Jackie's never life-threatening?
Basal cell is rarely life-threatening. If you have a basal cell cancer, you don't want to ignore it. You want to have it removed. But I think there are about 1,000 folks on average die each year from a basal cell carcinoma, and it's usually that someone has neglected it for many, many, many years. It grows by local extension, so it's going to get to a point where it's going to become very large and unsightly, but it's very, very unusual for someone to have a life-threatening condition from a basal cell or a squamous cell carcinoma. But again, you don't want to get to that point, and you don't want to get to a point where you need extensive surgery. You want to catch it early. You want to protect with sun and from the sun with shade and sunscreen. I love this slide. Everyone has the right for a sunburn. And sunscreen has to be applied appropriately. It has to be put on 30 minutes before you go out and reapplied every 2 hours. Now, I don't know if any of you have seen, but there are now sticks that you can put on that remind you when it's time to reapply the sunscreen. Because it's one of the things that people have a fallacy about. And I have a question for all of you now. So, when you go to the drugstore, you're confronted with sunscreen of all different SPF or sun protection factors. So this is a true-false, 1 if it's true, 2 if it's false. SPF 60 is twice as effective as SPF 30. you're good. This is basically the 85-15 rule. If you think something doesn't happen or happens a lot, you say 85% of the time, and then you're right 85% of the time. So in fact, SPF 60 is not twice as effective as SPF 30. And if you look at this graph, you can see that it really peaks around SPF 20. So it doesn't incrementally get much, much greater as you move from 15 to 30 incrementally. It's buying you a few more minutes. And again, this is the amount of time that the skin protection factor will allow you to be in the sun without being burned. So it's up to you, but there's really no benefit in buying SPF 70 or SPF 60 when SPF 15, 20, or 30 can be as effective if you use it right. So what are the sun exposure principles? You want to minimize being out. So coming to a seminar like today is perfect because we kept you out of the sun from 10 to 4. You want to beware on cloudy days because you can get UV radiation on the cloudy days. Slather on that sunscreen and do it before you go out. Reapply it after you go swimming or every 2 hours. Make sure that the sunscreen you get has both UVA and UVB protection. Cover up using clothing or a beautiful hat like our woman in front. And you can also use vitamin D supplementation rather than worrying about getting vitamin D from the skin. I'm going to shift gears a little bit now and talk about cosmetics and how we can be safe using cosmetics. So, does the government require safety testing for all personal care products? 1, if it's true, 2, if it's false. The 85-15 rule goes again. The 85% of you who thought that the government does not require safety testing are absolutely correct. The Food and Drug Administration, or the FDA, should have the authority to regulate cosmetics, but they don't. They do after there's been a health crisis associated with a particular product, but not proactively. There isn't any pre-market testing that's required currently. And some personal care products may contain harmful ingredients, and you know, this isn't meant to single out a particular product here, but we do know that there have been a variety of products in cosmetics and other personal care products that have been associated with reproductive toxicity, allergies, immunotoxicity, cancer, some that have been restricted in terms of their use, and there are other concerns, whether it's skin irritation, whether it's concern about problems of persistence or bioaccumulation. There can be some agents that you really don't want to have on your body, listed or unlisted, things like egg lauryl sulfate, and some of the dyes. We all remember red dye number 2 and how they were taken out of various food products. Excuse me. Endocrine disruptors are chemicals that work to change how well the reproductive hormones work in our body. Thyroid levels, there's actually recently been some information in the news about the EPA is regulating something called perchlorate in drinking water now, which comes from rocket fuel. And that's because it can affect iodine in young children. So it's actually being done to prevent an exposure in young children going forward. But some of these other products may have adverse effects. Other things that have become very well publicized are things like phthalates and something called bisphenol A that may have some adverse effects as they bioaccumulate.
Jackie?
Yes.
These are very disturbing to me. You know, I'm going out to the store and getting some cosmetics, and how do I know they're good or bad? Is there some place I can go that will tell me what products are good or bad? Because I don't know these names. These names have things I'll never remember. How do I find out about it?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, Bruce, because there are a couple of websites that are really appropriate and provide a lot of good information on where you can go. And now all of you are going to have these slides in your thumb drive, but if you want to write down, and one is the cosmeticsdatabase.com, and the other is EWG.org, which is the environmentalworkinggroup.org, and they list chemical compounds that you want to avoid. Now, again, this is all trying to think about this in moderation. I don't mean to scare you from using shampoo tonight or tomorrow or any personal care product, but just you may want to think about the fact that many of these compounds haven't been tested. And there is the Safe Cosmetic Act of 2010 that was put forward in Congress that we should all be supportive of, because this will provide us with the information to make sure that the compounds used in cosmetics are regulated or at least tested to make sure they're safe before they go forward. Again, be skeptical of marketing claims, because the FDA does not regulate this and people are making wild claims. I mean, you know, you're already seeing it that this product thickens your hair, or does this to your hair, or does that to your skin, and there's not a lot of science often behind it. You want to read the ingredient label. Chances are if you can't pronounce it, you may not want to be putting it on your skin.
We have a question over here.
Okay.
I'm almost afraid to ask this question, but what about hair color and nail products?
Well, you know, in terms of nail products, there are some nail products. First of all, I would caution folks from using the acrylic or the fake nails, because those are all sorts of chemicals that you don't want to be breathing in or having on your skin, and then they stay on there. So in terms of artificial nails, I would try to avoid those from a chemical perspective. And there are nail polishes that are phthalate-free. A number of years ago, many of the larger manufacturers did move to make sure that they were removing as many chemicals and lacquers out of them. And you know, the question came, what about if you're pregnant, should you be using it? I mean, if you're concerned that you should limit the use during periods like that. So I would go for and again, those two websites will give you the information on the brands that tend to have fewer chemicals. In terms of hair dyes, you know, there is concern that some of the hair dyes may be potentially carcinogenic. I think there's less concern about the ones that don't necessarily touch the scalp. So for folks who like highlighting, which typically is off the scalp, that tends to be a little better because there's less absorption. But you want to stay away from some of the heavier chemical processing if at all possible. Certainly some of the straightening techniques where they're using formaldehyde and things that have formaldehyde in them, you want to try to avoid.
Thanks.
So, you know, we've given you a little overview on some of the tools.
So, but Jackie, so does coloring hair, then there's increased risk of cancer when you do that?
I'm sorry, if there's...
There is an increased risk of cancer, studies shown when you do dye your hair?
No, there has not been a study that's shown in folks who dye their hair that they have increased rates of hair cancer. I do want to caution some folks, though, please don't use Grecian formula or one of those hair dyes for men that slowly changes your hair color, because they're actually lead laden. And what they can do is contaminate your house with lead. So you don't want to use them, because your grandchildren may get lead exposure. But the studies have all looked more at hairdressers, and there's questions whether hairdressers are at increased risk. Again, their exposures are continuous, they're daily. It isn't an episodic exposure, and they're dealing with much stronger chemicals, they're mixing the chemicals. So there hasn't been a study yet that's shown that folks who have gotten their hair dyed are at increased risk.